What are the compliance and leadership lessons from Episode 1, The Man Trap? Find out in this 2022 update to Trekking Through Compliance.
Compliance, the final frontier. Tom Fox is the voyager of Trekking Through Compliance. His mission? To explore the original series and seek out and share what it can teach you about compliance. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
Episode 1, The Man Trap. Air date, September 8th, 1966. Written by George Clayton Thomas, directed by Mark Daniels. The Man Trap was the first aired regular season episode of Star Trek. In this episode, a landing party from the Enterprise beams down to perform an annual checkup of scientist Bob Crater and his wife Nancy Crater, who have been living on planet M113 for 5 years. Without realizing it, each crew member sees a different Nancy Crater. In fact, Nancy's appearance corresponds to each man's fantasy of an extremely attractive woman. Crewman Darnell, for instance, sees a voluptuous blonde he met on Ripley's Pleasure Planet. Bones sees an attractive woman at 25, and Kirk sees an older woman with mature charms. Dr. Crater and Nancy Crater both appear in good health, but Dr. Crater goes out of his way to request an additional supply of salt from the Enterprise's stores. Dr. Crater does the best to get rid of the landing party as quickly as possible. Shortly thereafter, Crewman Darnell wanders off after Nancy Crater, but dies under mysterious circumstances. His corpse, when discovered, is found to be covered with a curious red molting. A Borgia plant belonging to the same family as the deadly nightshade and containing an alkaloid poison is found in his mouth. Nancy claims to have seen him eating it, and she tried to stop him. However, Bones knows alkaloid poisoning when he sees it and is immediately convinced that something is amiss. Further tests show that Darnell's body is completely devoid of salt. When an additional landing party beams down, crewmen Sturgeon and Green are killed, and the salt is removed from their bodies. However, Green's body is not discovered, and Nancy Crater uses her shape-shifting trick to assume his form. As Green, she transports aboard the Enterprise with Kirk and Bones, who are the only remaining survivors of the landing party. Green makes his way into Sulo's quarters after observing a lunch tray with a shaker being brought in, but hightails it out when Sulu's pet plant begins shrieking at him. Green transforms into a handsome Swahili man and attempts to seduce Uhura. Fortunately for Uhura, the man's advances are interrupted by passing crew members. Meanwhile, a scan of the planet's surface reveals only a single life form, so Kirk and Spock realize that Nancy must have beamed aboard the Enterprise and start searching for her. While Spock and Kirk are thus engaged, the creature becomes another crew member, then pays a visit to McCoy in the form of Nancy Crater. She puts McCoy to sleep with his own sleeping pills while pretending to help him rest, then assumes his form. In the meantime, Spock and Kirk have beamed down to the planet to question Dr. Crater. Here they discover Green's body. By questioning Dr. Crater, they also learn that Nancy is dead and that her form has been taken over by the last remaining indigenous creature of the planet. As the audience has known for some time, this creature is capable of assuming any form and requires salt to live. Kirk and Spock then beam Dr. Crater aboard the Enterprise, where he immediately recognizes McCoy as one of Nancy's impersonations, but does not reveal him. The creature returns Dr. Crater's loyalty by killing him and then attacks Spock. Fortunately, because of Spock's non-human blood, he survives the attack without major injury. Bones then prevents Kirk from killing the creature and then stands idly by as it begins to drain away the salt from Kirk's body. At this juncture, Spock rushes in and demonstrates to McCoy that the woman attacking Kirk cannot possibly be Nancy Crater by striking her repeatedly and forcefully. Nancy does not even flinch and then sends Spock flying across the room with a single counterblow. When the creature attacks Kirk again, its true alien form is revealed, and Bones kills it with a phaser even after it reverts to Nancy's form.
This first episode of Star Trek The Original Series premiered in September of 1966. I find it powerful today for several reasons from the storytelling perspective. First is the colors. For those of you who don't know what it was like in the 60s, the color TVs really emphasized different levels of brightness in a way that's not used as much today. So we had lots of primary colors that were used in backgrounds because color TV was so new. And it really gets me to think about the visual aspect of your brand and your message. So when you communicate to your stakeholders, i.e. your employees, the customers of your compliance program, do you think about the visual message and visual branding? It may be something that you would like to consider. Also, the story itself really emphasizes the anguish of McCoy for a love lost, and what you see down the road is not always the truth of what you remembered. So McCoy sees Nancy as a young woman, not the mature woman that Kirk sees and that she obviously is now. So you need to sometimes check your own filters to see if you are seeing something that you remember or seeing it as it is now. Obviously, it was a great introduction to a new form of science fiction on television, and that really leads me to ask you to consider what is the storytelling you were using in your compliance program. Are you using comedy? Are you using dramatic news? Are you using science fiction? There may be a wide variety of ways that you can tell a story in your compliance program, drawing upon this episode for inspiration. Looking back some 50 plus years later, this episode was a great introduction to Star Trek, obviously Star Trek, the original series, and everything that came thereafter. I hope you will rewatch this episode and enjoy it for the storytelling, enjoy it for the colors, enjoy it for its dramatic effects, and think about how you can use the Star Trek genre, and the man trap in telling your story of compliance.
So what are some of the leadership lessons that we can take from this first aired episode? Well, the first thing we have to note is that although this was aired first, this was not the first recording of Star Trek as a TV series. It was the 5th or 6th episode recorded. So this first point is perhaps a little problematic, but that's, as a compliance officer, you need to spend some time to introduce yourself. You need to introduce yourself to your stakeholders. You need to introduce yourself to your customers or your employees. You need to introduce yourself to your third parties. You need to introduce yourself to those outside your organization who you interact with and have input with. So there's a wide variety of stakeholders. This episode was selected to be the first aired episode, and we get a sense of who Spock is, I think, most clearly in this episode. So, and that came through Nancy Crater trying to take his blood, or at least drain the salt from his body, but because his blood was so different than a Terran, he was rejected by Nancy Crater, and really emphasizing the uniqueness and otherness of Spock, of course, in addition to the ears. Second, and this is a theme that we will get back to in several Star Trek episodes, but it's the leadership theory. It was a leadership theory of your senior officer is on your away team. Now, this is certainly an acknowledged leadership theory, and I was most interested from my World War II serving father, who appreciated this as a leadership theory. Nevertheless, you have to recognize there are certain costs. Obviously, the captain, if he's on an away team, is subject to the dangers and risks of being injured and or killed. But here you have Captain Kirk, who is generally always on an away team. So the message is get out of the office, learn what you can. There's a lot to be learned out there in your organization, and certainly from other stakeholders that I mentioned, third parties, customers, people in the supply chain, sales agents. Get out and learn them. And finally, number 3, which is to use facts, not suppositions, when you make your decisions. If you recall that when the scan of the planet revealed only a single life form, Kirk and Spock realized that Nancy Crater must have beamed aboard the Enterprise and started looking for her. This is important in certainly even more so in today's age of Me Too, but also in your speak up culture to take the information in and then investigate and use your facts to help you make a determination of what has actually happened. So some great lessons from this first air date, certainly one that I remember, and I hope that you will enjoy watching it if you have the chance, and I hope that you will join me again tomorrow when we take a look at Charlie X.
If you enjoyed this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, you can help it grow by sharing it with the biggest Trek fan you know.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.